Chapter 4, the retweet.
Holy cow. We made it to chapter 4. The retweet.
So we have decided to call this chapter the retweet because, as you have seen up to this point, we have some crazy crap happen. And things are just kind of bonkers. And it's almost like history repeats itself over and over again. If you don't learn from your mistakes, they're bound to come back and bite you in the ass, right? And we're really seeing that at Come As You Are in this chapter. And so things that maybe were a little bit problematic in chapter 3, you're going to really see come around again in chapter 4. And if you think they were handled poorly the first time, boy, do we... I feel like VeggieTales. Do we have a show for you?
But like, it's so interesting to me because when you come to the realization that there's a system, and you have religious systems and, school systems and institutions. And I think that for me was like the biggest realization is that the systems aren't broken. The systems are doing exactly what they're designed to do. And when you have that realization and you start to see how life plays out within these systems, you go, well, no wonder. Like, duh, nothing's changing. The system is systeming, and you're just playing a part within the system. And it's almost like there's an enter and an exit, and then we just start all over again. And it's like these cycles. But when you're in it, like you would even say it, like you would say it and you would understand that this is what was happening, but you believed that it was normal and that it was just the process, and you were just happy to have stayed. Like you're the one who stayed, and that becomes a badge of honor.
Yep.
And so
you are more faithful. You are more holy. You are more righteous because you have like the wherewithal,
the endurance
to stay and weather the storm and
run the good race and be faithful beyond
life
faith.
Is not always easy.
Yeah.
And yes, and all really, the things.
Like, this is a time for me, like the reality that like how did you get here? Like, okay, so we're going to be in 2017, 2018. We're going to cover in chapter 4.
Yeah.
And when you think about from the moment the church started and the way it was established and all of the rules, principles, bylaws, guidelines, the way that this one man who decided to start a church, that things were going to be run, it's like, that's great when you have 10 people, right? And you don't, you have some things that come up, but you recycle, right? And then you have a church of like 100 people, 150 people, a church of 300 people. But there comes a point where like you almost have to pay the piper because you've been promising people things and you keep moving the proverbial carrot. But like eventually, like looking back, like the perspective looking back, you go, well, duh, Tom. Like there was going to come a time when you had to pay the piper. And I think chapter 4 of all the cycles that we've been through now, because our listeners have been through these cycles, like you've been through and I know you're sitting there and you're like, what the heck's wrong with you ladies? Why did you stay for cycle 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? But chapter 4 is really this place where I think it all starts to come together. And I would really call this like the beginning of the end, like what we thought was the end and how we thought it began right then and there, in a few years. When you timeline it out and you look at it, you realize you're like, no, this is actually when this time to pay the piper and people start awakening and questioning things, and these shiftings and these cycles become bigger and bigger. Like this is really the beginning of the end.
And this is the point where we were timelining, where I think I have a moment of like, I was that miserable for that long. Like, I knew stuff was wrong for that
Yeah.
long. And I convinced myself that I could
Yeah.
make it better. And I've described it as God wanted to burn stuff to the ground. And for years, I heaped buckets of water on it and was like, no, I can save it. I can save it. And I was convincing myself that it was God who wanted me to save it. But in all reality, I was desperate to hold on to it. And I was desperate because that's the only thing I had.
Yeah, it's so crazy how you can be just so... I was going to say something, I don't remember, but yeah, it is. It's mind-boggling to me that like you just are so indoctrinated and so believing the things that are, and here's the crazy part, because it's true. Like there's a lot of truth in a lot of the things that you are led to believe. It's just the way they're being executed is for a purpose that is not what it's supposed to be, And I think that we've talked a lot about that, like where you really, like when you deconstruct these things and you pull them apart and you find, like, especially for you being like 15 years old, the first time you came to this church, and just realizing that like, you have to even go back to like, I don't even know if I'm saved. I don't know if God is real. like everything I've believed for the last 20 years of my entire young adult to adult life is completely being thrown into question and valid because things that are meant for good and truths that there are out there have been used. So it's not to say that these things are lies and that these things, like, it's like God exists, but God was used in a way that manipulated your entire life. And my goodness, like, that's a lot. That's a lot. But I think in this next chapter, I think one, it's funny that your life was falling apart and mine was really good in chapter 3. And then now in chapter 4, my life starts to fall apart and yours is really good. like we can't do it at the same time. There's got to be this teeter-totter.
Well, because when we do it at the same time, we both leave the church.
Yeah, that's right. You're right. That's what happened. But, when you sit back and just, I know we talk about the timelining a lot but even still, like when we sat down to plan this chapter, there's just layer upon layer upon layer upon layer. And it's like, you have to take it in. And then there's things that you're like, I never thought about that. And then you have conversations with people who were also there and they give you a new insight to, you're like, wow, like if that's what you were going through, I have to almost reevaluate the way I went through it. And now you've opened up new thoughts that I have toward, like, I never considered that angle. I never considered that side of the story. Yeah. And so then you go, oh, wow. And so, yeah, like, but yeah, this chapter is just, it's just going to take a turn for like, and it's not even like halfway through the chapter. Like, welcome to the first episode. We're going to just come right at it in episode 1.